thanks to everyone for tuning in. I mean, wow, what a book, Shelley. I mean, it really, really is quite an incredible book. And of course, I'm not the only one to say so. It's been, incredibly received by lots of people. And I think that, it really struck a chord with me, not only professionally, because obviously I've been to the house and we worked together on the sale of the house, but personally too. And I think I would really urge everyone listening to read the book if they haven't already, or as you told me earlier, you can also listen to it on audio. I think it's perfect for this lockdown period. I mean, it's a meditation on a single house, isn't it? A home, which is something that we can all relate to at the moment, as we're, having to meditate on our own homes and get to know our own homes a little bit better. And I also think that the book is it's a fantastic combination of big, powerful themes and small, everyday details, again, which is something I think that everyone can relate to. And I think lastly, for me personally, as someone who spends most of my time visiting houses, it was a chance, thanks to the kind of evocativeness of your writing, I suppose, to be able to go somewhere else, to be able to visit somewhere else, to be able to visit another house. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to start showing some images of the house.
Right.
Both our images and your images as we go along. And I think I wanted to start by reading a quote from your father that you put in the book, which says that he says that to him a full life means a life composed of many simple, small pleasures. So rather than grander, more ambitious sort of bucket list type ambitions, he seems to be interested in simple, small pleasures. And I think that's an attitude that would have stood him in good stead for the lockdown if we were alive today, don't you think?
Yes, I think it would. I think he'd have, in a sort of perverse sort of way, quite enjoyed the lockdown.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He liked seeing his close friends and that sort of thing, but he wasn't one who was a great socializer at all. He was happiest at High Sunderland for nearly, for the 50 odd years that he lived there. It was
you describe in the book him constantly checking with your mother what time they might be able to leave a party to get back home whenever they head somewhere.
It's true. It used to drive her insane that he would on the way over to whatever party, he'd always check what time he could. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the house, which we can see pictures of now, which I mean really is an amazing house. Obviously I've been there twice. I went there once to meet your father, and then we obviously met again at the house in 2017. But it was Womersley's first proper commission, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so. And it sort of came about by complete chance, as it were, because my parents were holidaying in Yorkshire and drove past what was then Peter's brother's house, which Peter had designed as a wedding present for his brother. And my father was just bowled over by seeing this creation amongst the trees. So they knocked on the door, and John Womersley very kindly let them come in and gave them Peter's details. And from that my father asked Peter to design High Sunderland.
I think, what interests me is that your father and Peter got on very well throughout their lives, despite Peter, sort of coming across as a bit of an irascible figure in your book, really. And so, and you also refer in your book to, for instance, Edith Farnsworth and how she fell out with Mies van der Rohe. And, I've also just been reading this book, which is by the clients of Peter Eisenman's house, who also similarly had very challenging relationships with their architect. So what is it about your father, you think, that allowed him to have what seems to be unusually successful relationship with his architect?
I think there were many different reasons why they got on so well. I think I mentioned in the book, I think there was a feeling that they were both outsiders in their own different sort of ways, which bonded them. I do describe Peter as quite irascible, but I think that's because I was describing him for most of my life when I really when Peter was coming over every Sunday for dinner and things. I was a child, so he I don't think he particularly liked children until they could hold a good conversation. So I think that's why I found him quite a scary figure. But for my father, I believe it was his uncompromising architectural vision that my father appreciated, and the fact that he wouldn't compromise on things. And
he seemed to very much respect Peter's vision, whilst also making a couple of changes. I think originally the travertine marble was supposed to be black, wasn't it, for instance? But I think
a lot of the travertine was originally black marble, and a lot of the floors were wooden originally.
Right.
And then my father, as the years passed, decided, I think he's seen travertine on holidays in Italy and just fell in love with it and knew it would look beautiful in the house. So, and he was never a lover of black.
No.
So, so he decided to have it changed. But I think Peter was more than happy to
why do you think Peter isn't as celebrated as perhaps he should be? I mean, to my mind, he is as good as any British architect in terms of designing houses of the 20th century. I mean, he really is. Yet, as an example, I still struggle to pronounce his surname, and I wonder why that is.
It's a very good question, and one that makes me very sad, because like you, I think he should be far more celebrated and well known. I think perhaps because he did set up his practice in the borders of Scotland, he wasn't London centric. And I think that counted against him. Maybe his temperament also counted against him.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Maybe he wasn't as media friendly as other architects of the period.
Yes, that could be. He had an uncompromising vision, and that would be quite difficult to work alongside if you were commissioning him, unless you really believed in what he was doing, which my father did, thankfully.
Yeah. I think one of my favourite lines in the book is your observation that no one's ever spotted a ghost in a modernist house. Now, what is it about modernist houses that, such as High Sunderland, that make them such hard places to harbour kind of ghoulish spirits and things, do you think?
Well, for me, it was because it was so light and bright inside.
Yeah.
And I love a good Victorian novel where there are creaking doors and corridors and dark cellars and attics, and High Sunderland doesn't have any of that, so you couldn't get a traditional spooky ghost at High Sunderland. It just wasn't going to happen.
No. I mean, I think one of the great achievements of the book is that, there's a significant amount of what we might call heaviness in the book. There's some lots of very serious subjects in there. You tackle, subjects such as Auschwitz, sexual assault, depression, alcoholism. They all appear, but there's a lightness too, particularly in your descriptions of nature and the gardens, and there's humour throughout the book. I mean, why was it important to you to have that balance of the heaviness and the lightness?
Well, it was a reflection really of my life with my parents and the house. It was you know, I couldn't escape from the fact of my father's history, even though he very rarely spoke about it. But I didn't want to write a book that was, you know, just drowning in misery, because I had a blissful childhood, really, and a very privileged one. And he was also for all his sort of curmudgeonliness, he was a very kind, generous man. Yeah. He adored us children, and he was very funny. Right. And I found him very funny. Yeah. So I wanted to bring in light and dark, because I think you know, darkness works best if you have some light, and vice versa.
I know, exactly, and I think that, you know, and similarly, your father, as you say, is portrayed in the book as ultimately a hero, but with some quite significant dashes of villain in there. You know, I think. Well,
my friends did used to sort of call him a James Bond villain.
Did they? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think particularly, your teenage self seems to be most challenged. I think. I think there's a line you say no one was as kind or as funny or as wise as my father, and then 2 lines later you say I wanted to murder him. Maybe you can tell us, for those who haven't read the book, about the Battle of the Christmas Tree.
Oh my goodness, the Battle of the Christmas Tree. I always wanted to have a Christmas tree in the living room, of which you can see a picture now. And my father really wasn't into Christmas trees at all. He found them extremely disturbing and ugly. And so over my childhood, we negotiated and renegotiated, and I bullied him, and he stamped his foot, and the Christmas tree got close to the living room, and then it went further away. And eventually I did get it into the living room when he was in his late 80s. Right. But it was a long battle.
Yeah. And you know, I think it's one of my favorite passages about your father is his continuing battle with the moles.
Oh.
Who seem to be, you know, the moles seem to want to upset his perfect lawns at all times. And you have this fantastic description of him, which I'll read here. It says, Berry removes himself to the garden, sporting a white woolly hat that stands bolt upright, making him look like the Pope. He also wears sunglasses and a pair of bright yellow rubber gloves. He couldn't find a trowel in the shed, so in his right hand he is brandishing a large serving spoon, while in his left is a mole trap. And that image of him, you know, desperately trying to bring order to the garden against these unruly moles is a particularly strong one. And I think that one of the other things that you struggle with in the book is the fact that for a lot of time you didn't even have a door on your bedroom. Is that right?
That's right. It was because it is an open plan house. Originally, we had 2 little cabins. My sister and I had 2 sort of little cabins, which were built as part of what then became the middle bedroom, where the cabins were knocked into one. Yeah. And I had one large room, but this room had a door through onto a corridor into the kitchen, and there was no door to it. So for a long time, until I was in my teenage years, there was no door, which I quite liked. It was nice to hear the noises from the kitchen, or if my parents were entertaining, I could hear what was going on, and I found that very comforting. But when I got to my teenage years and wanted privacy and wanted to be able to slam a door every now and again. I didn't have one, so I demanded one be put in.
Well, I think it's it's all too easy to describe your relationship with the house and with your father as a love-hate relationship. But I think that what's so great about the book is it shows you all the shades in between, the extremes of love and hate. I mean, there's a fantastic passage where you actually decide that you want to actually physically attack the house. I'm just trying to find it here. But then there are times that you movingly describe how, I suppose, in love with the house you are as well. And I suppose you must have gone through all your days somewhere in between those two extremes.
Not all my days. I think, as a child, a small child, I adored it. And I
Did you?
I absolutely adored it. Although I took it for granted that, I didn't see it as very special, but it was home and it was mum and dad.
Although you did like to occasionally escape to what you call the dark interiors of the wood up at on the other side of the garden occasionally.
I did. I used to play there a lot with friends, and I did like the woods up to a point. They were quite scary too, but I did love the house. I think the attacking of it was really when I was when I'd come back in my late 40s to look after Dad. Yeah. And I found it quite restrictive because it was very difficult to leave the house without him sort of worrying where I was going and when I'd be back, and so it felt quite prison-like at times.
I see.
But that was really more to do with looking after an elderly parent.
Right. Okay.
Rather than, maybe, I'd say. Yes.
You say, you say you wanted to put a fist through the glass and watch the glory of something so rigid explode into 1,000 billion pieces. I mean, that's just sheer frustration, isn't it, really?
It is. It is. And I suppose the rigidity was also partly my father. So he was, he had very rigid views on things, and he was all, he would love to discuss and see other people's points of view, but he always knew he was right. So you didn't have many places you could go with that. Yeah.
I mean, there's a great scene where he's scrubbing the silver birches as well. And you describe him as having a profound fear of chaos. Now, do you think his upbringing in what is now Serbia, which, as you outline, is, has a lot of trauma in it, do you think that influences what you describe as his fear of chaos?
I definitely think there is something around what happened during the war and the fact that his family was taken to Auschwitz. He was in Jerusalem at the time, so he wasn't there, but the fact that his family home, which he always said was beautiful, and how much he loved it, and it was destroyed, it was ruined, really. So I think that must have fed into some sort of underlying, one of the reasons why he does have or did have a fear of disorder. I also think his rigidity was also to do with his upbringing, as well as his views on design, because of course he had a very orthodox Jewish upbringing, which was very regulated, and so that must have had an effect as well.
I mean, that said, and we've talked about the Battle of the Christmas Tree and what have you, but when you finally managed to bring a pet into the house, your dog Henry,
Yes.
you say that Berry fell in love with Henry instantly, and every night he insisted on coming to wish him good night. So, you know, despite saying, no, why should we ever need a dog here? He absolutely loves having it. Is that right?
He adored Henry. And yeah, he would come through every evening and to say good night, not to me, to Henry.
Right.
But when I was growing up, I managed to persuade him to have a cat, because for decades
Right.
he wouldn't have any animals, and I finally, after, I think, actually, having said that, my brother did have hamsters, but my father wouldn't have a cat. But he adored this cat when we finally got it, and the cat adored him. So, you know, he loved animals. I'm not sure why he didn't want me to get a dog.
Right.
Because I knew the moment the dog entered the house, he would fall in love. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, I can relate to that. You know, I've said to my wife for many years, no dogs in the house, and then she went and got one anyway. And of course, now I'm absolutely. Yeah.
Of course.
I mean, obviously, what it says on the back of the book. In fact, my father was the house, and the house was my father. I mean, so much so that when you describe coming back from the hospital when he had died and half expecting the house not to be there, but of course it was there. And you also describe in a very moving passage a sort of washing the house was one of the first things that you really put your mind to after your father's death, and you compared that to the ritualized kind of washing of a dead person's body. I mean, is it hard to think today about the house existing without your father in it, or without a Klein in it?
It's heartbreaking. I mean, I you know, the new owners, I wish them all the happiness that we had there, but I can't. I'm not sure whether I'm ever going to get over having sold it. Yeah. Somewhere in my mind, it still belongs to us. So,
yeah.
And I'm there most days in my mind at some point. Yeah.
I mean, you fantasized about setting fire to the whole thing before you know, and would it be easier, do you think, if it just wasn't there today?
Yes, I think it would, actually. I think it would. It would and it wouldn't, obviously. Yeah. You know, it's lovely to know it is still there. But the fact that it is still there and I can't walk in at any moment. Yeah. I find very difficult because, you know, it is no longer ours. So yes, there are lots of feelings around it. Yeah.
We've had a question from Tony asking about the how the house and the studio are surviving, you know, up to this day. You know, one is obviously timber frame and one is concrete, but obviously you haven't been there now for however long, so you don't know the answer to that. But obviously we know that the studio is unoccupied still.
Yeah, it's very sad, really, the state the studio is in. I believe because it is concrete, it's still sort of holding solid, but it isn't in a good sort of state of repair.
No.
And it's empty, so that doesn't help. And it's been empty for quite, you know, a number of years now. The house, when I left it, was in good repair, and I really believe that the owners were going to look after it very well.
Yeah. And I mean, the studio is an incredible building. Which is, for people who don't know, was built a little bit later, but very close by. You can't actually see it from the house, though, can you?
No, you can't.
No, but it's a very short walk. And where High Sunderland is all light in terms of a timber structure and lots of glass, the studio is more what sort of known as brutalist, I suppose, and heavy. Was that a conscious decision of your father's to contrast the two, or was it just what was presented to him?
I think it was what was presented to him. I think it was sort of Peter's vision, and I believe it sort of had echoes of Falling Water, which is one of Peter's, favorite buildings. I think they did compromise, or Peter had put an oval structure on the top, which Dad didn't agree with and asked not to have, he wanted it purely the rectangles and squares. He didn't feel the oval fitted it. So I think that was the only sort of input he had. As far as I know, I was away a lot of the time around the studio being built, so I wasn't privy to many conversations.
Okay, I've quite a few people are asking if there are any pictures of the studio. We don't have any, but it's very easy to Google. Just put in Klein Studio, and I'm sure you'll find it.
There are, and there's a picture of it in the book.
And there's a picture of it in the book, indeed, indeed, exactly. Yes. I think that one of another great bit is your mother, of course, who you write, there cannot be many homes where the woman of the house sacrifices her own sense of style for that of her husband. And there's a wonderful story about her having a sort of a secret stash of cut crystal cranberry sherry glasses in the cupboard. Do you think she ever resented having to live under the sort of design rule of your father, as it were, or did she actually embrace that?
No, she embraced it. She loved the house. I can't say as much as my father, because no one could love it as much as he did. But no, she was a very stylish woman in her own right. She grew up in a Victorian sort of house in London, and then another one in Leeds. So I don't think, I think she would have been perfectly happy in a Victorian sort of situation. But the fact that they created, or my father decided that he wanted to create this house, she was right behind him, and she loved it. We've got people asking a little bit about the original fixtures and furnishings, and a lot of them were actually designed by Peter, weren't they, specifically for the house? Yes.
I mean, the built-in couches, which you describe as, well, how is it that you describe the couches in the book?
They were very uncomfortable. I mean, if you were watching a long film, it was quite difficult. But they, as my father said, they were very beautiful couches, and Peter had designed them. So he was horrified when I said, could we have something more comfortable? It just wasn't going to happen. And actually, when I moved back and I turned what was then the middle bedroom into my own living room, I bought a huge squishy couch, which he just rolled his eyes at. He wasn't impressed at all.
And along the same lines, we have a question from Martin, who says, has the design of the house had a lasting influence on your later choices of home? Do you live in a mid-century building?
I wish I did. I wish I did. No, I live in a Victorian block of flats. So I did look at mid-century buildings, but for all sorts of reasons, it didn't work for me. But I would love to live in a mid-century home again.
Sadly, they're too few and far between, really, in this country.
They are.
So, obviously, when we got the call from you, that was a very exciting moment for us at the company. And I remember coming up to Edinburgh on the overnight train and coming to see the house. And quite frequently houses that you've seen in books and things like that disappoint in the flesh, particularly some modernist houses, but this absolutely didn't. Absolutely was magical in reality than the pictures can describe, and our pictures are pretty good, but it really is it really is magical, and I think that, and what I remember most about it was that we obviously had to value it, and in Scotland you need to have a external surveyor come and value something, and I thought, oh my god, here we go, they're going to put in what's called the home report some very low figure, which they did, and I spent a long time persuading the surveyor to bump up the price. Eventually he managed to bump it up a little bit, but we obviously put it on the market at quite a bit over that price, and actually the house sold for over our asking price, and we had 5 buyers, and as Ali said, we haven't had a more popular house on our website ever.
Amazing.
It is amazing, and I think that is, the combination of Peter's architecture, the condition of the house, obviously the way that your father occupied it, and the absolutely incredible setting of the house. Now, the amount of time people have said to me, oh, if only that house were moved closer to London, but that would obviously completely ruin the point of it, would it not?
It certainly would. I mean, I think if it was near London, yes, we would have made a lot more money from it.
Yeah.
Although we, as you said, we sold it very well, but that house is enhanced by the views, and the Scottish borders are so beautiful, and and my father was very lucky to find a plot of land that he was able to buy with the most stunning views. I mean, it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
I really defy anyone to find a more beautiful setting for a house.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something your father obviously reveled, didn't he? I mean, you describe him bringing home puffballs, oak apples, buzzard feathers, wasps' nests, and bird skulls. All of which made their way into his work, whether it be his textiles or his paintings, didn't they?
Yes, no, he was as in love with the Borders landscape as I was.
Yeah.
And was quite happy pottering around either in the garden or, in his younger days, going out for long walks with us as children. No, we all had, maybe not my mother so much, but the rest of us all had a big relationship with the natural world. She was less outdoorsy. But she enjoyed looking at it from behind, from inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've got another question here, which says, how would you convince someone to embrace living in a house like this, to overcome their fears of being remote, in relative darkness at night, on your own secluded plot? So I think that's obviously saying it's a very exposing house, because essentially you're, and you describe in the book, in fact, a sort of fear of things going on the other side of the glass. How did you reconcile yourself with that? And particularly when you spent 3-4 years living there on your own.
It's funny because as a child, yes, I did used to scare myself thinking people were going to be looking in, and that was a very real sort of. My imagination ran wild as a child.
Yeah.
When I went back as an adult and after my father died and I lived there by myself, I wasn't frightened at all.
No.
And I had friends from London who'd come up and stay, and bearing in mind that I was with them there, they all to a T said they didn't know how I could sleep alone at night in the house, but I presume because I'd known it all my life and it did become a sort of third parent to me, I never felt unsafe or worried. And you know, we never had any problems. There was,
Yeah.
you know, there was nothing that frightened us. So,
Yeah.
I don't know how I'd convince anyone, but I'd say that, you know, try it and see. I mean, you can but try, and
Yeah.
you know, most people are, the chances of something bad happening, I tend to think, are very remote.
Yeah.
And that's the way I like to operate. So
Yeah. And just out of interest, what did the locals think of the house?
I think the thing is, you can't actually see the house from the road. So
No.
there was, you know, I realized that people who'd lived in the borders, were born and brought up in the borders, if they came sort of in their 50s to the house, and they go, I never knew this was here.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
it's extraordinary. But I think the general reaction was either one of curiosity or wonder. There were a handful of people who thought it was the ugliest thing, you know,
Yeah.
and the studio, because that was on the main road.
Yes. Yeah.
There were severe, you know, either you loved it or hated it.
Yeah.
And plenty of people didn't. It's as you said, it's more brutalist, so it's more in your face.
Yes.
Quite a difficult structure to
Yeah.
sort of appreciate.
Yeah, it takes a certain attitude. Of course, I think it's absolutely a fantastic house. Okay, well, I think we'll. I'll finish with another quote from your father. I think, where he says, "To design means simply to care." That was what he said. And you know, people often say to me when I try to explain that, you know, we deal with houses of interesting design, they always say, you know, oh, but aren't all houses designed? And so that really struck me, that actually, yes, but not all houses are designed with care, you know. And this was a house that was designed with care and lived in with care. And I just wondered why you thought he cared so much about design, your father.
Oh, end with a really difficult question. I think because good design made him feel comfortable and at home, as it were. You know, something that wasn't well designed, either, you know, the way it looked or the way it functioned, upset him.
Yeah.
Really upset him. And yeah, that's sort of probably the simplest way I can put it. I mean, I'm sure there are lots more, you know, more sides to that, but yeah, good design mattered because it made life more pleasurable, and he really thought it mattered.
And have you inherited that particular outlook on life and design?
To an extent, not to the extent my father did. I'm far more flexible, I think, and I appreciate. I quite like different eras and things, but I'm finding that as I grow older, I'm getting closer to the way he saw things.
Okay,
which is quite worrying for me. But
okay.
I am, yes.
Well, thanks a lot, Shelley. Thanks again, and yeah, look forward to speaking soon. Bye.
Bye, Albert.